And in 2005, I was given orders to deploy to Baghdad in central Iraq. I deployed there. The rest of the British Army was down in Basra. There's about 20, 30 of us up in Baghdad in a sort of joint US-UK Special Operations Force. Now, I want to talk about a process that I think is that we can find this process in all sorts of different aspects of our lives, especially in work. And that process is compartmentalization. And that is when a big process is broken down into lots of easy-to-do parts. You could call it the division of labour. You know, think about the production line, Henry Ford, all this kind of stuff. So this big process is broken down into easy-to-do parts. And sometimes the people within this process are unaware of the bigger picture. So they're just doing their little bit, and maybe they don't see what's really going on. So what was the process that we were operating in Iraq? Well, the start of that process would be that we would pay for intelligence. MI6. It's not James Bond. He's not running around in a suit, tuxedo, shagging women and drinking martinis. He's making it known to the local population that if they provide intelligence on insurgents, people who are involved in trying to forcefully evict the occupation, I will give you money if you tell me the names and addresses of these people. In Iraq at the time, 2005, high levels of unemployment, goods are scarce, prices are high. If someone's offering $200, $400 for some information, if you know some information, you might hand it over. Even if you don't know some information, you might make it up. Who cares? I get my $400. Maybe you tell a story about a neighbour that you've had an issue with for years and years and years. Or maybe you tell a story about the person from the different religious sects, or the person who beat you up once or slighted your family. Doesn't really matter. Maybe you really do know an insurgent, and you give them their name and address. So that's the first part of the process. We take the intelligence in. That intelligence, name and address, maybe a photo, is handed on to a surveillance team. Now, if you're on a surveillance team, and someone from MI6 gives you a piece of information, piece of intelligence, you're going to trust them, right? They're our guys. They're with us. Why would I not trust them? Why would they lie to me? It doesn't even come into your head. You just think, great, we've got someone else. The surveillance team spends time circling the house, watching these people. Now, if you've been told by someone you trust that you're going to watch a dangerous terrorist, everything they do becomes suspicious. So, the dangerous terrorist goes out into his back garden, maybe he starts digging. You're not thinking potatoes, you're thinking weapons. Dangerous terrorist takes a bag out of his house, puts it in his boot, and drives somewhere else, and hands over the bag. You're not thinking shopping or maybe a tool that someone needed. You're thinking, that's a weapon, and this is part of a bigger terrorist network. And over a period of time, you watch these people going about their day-to-day business with a suspicious state of mind, and you build up a big picture of what's going on. Who their friends are, the buildings they live in, where they sleep. And after a period of time, you think that you've got a big picture of what is going on, and so you hand that job, that information, over to the next team, which is the team that I was involved in. Now, I've actually spent a long time purposefully trying to forget military terms, forget military sort of language. So in the press, this team would be called something like a kill or capture team. We'd be given, in a room like this, a big briefing, maps, air photography, pictures, names, and we'd be told, you need to go and detain this person. Now, people often say, oh, when you're in special forces, you get to do what you want. You get to think for yourself. Well, you do get to think for yourself. They tell you who you're going to arrest or who you're going to attack, and you get to decide how to do it. But there is never any question about who you will attack or who you will arrest. So there is a certain amount of free play in that. We would sneak out into the night, maybe in jeeps or helicopters, depending on where we were going, and sneak up to this person's house. And I just want you to try and imagine being inside that house. Try and imagine being asleep inside your house, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, it's quiet, everyone's asleep in the house. Maybe your sons and daughters are in the next room, you know, whatever the family situation is. And the first sort of inkling you get that we are coming to get you is when your front door or your front wall is smashed to bits by an explosion. We would sneak up to your house, lay a huge amount of explosives on the front door or on a wall, bang it off. Your house is still dark, there's a huge explosion, rocks through your house, your ears are ringing, there's dust everywhere, it's still dark. You're thinking, what the fuck is going on? You're terrified. Before you've even got time to think what's just happened, you can hear men in your house, 20 men. You can hear them downstairs, they're kicking the doors in, they're coming up the stairs, they've kicked your door in, they've got you. You've been held at gunpoint, dragged out of your bed. All the men are taken into one room, all the women and children are taken into another room, you're all held at gunpoint. You can hear the males of the house being interrogated, maybe slapped around a bit, shouted at in a foreign language that you don't understand. Whilst this process was going on, my job was to go around the houses with a big postal sack, ransack the houses, and take anything of value. Mobile phones, bank statements, passports, money, computers, anything of any, what we would say, any intelligence value, but also just so happened to be anything of any value to that family. This might take 20 minutes. This wasn't a careful search. This was just turning the whole house upside down. After 20 minutes, we'd be finished. We'd have maybe 2 big sacks full of these people's possessions. Go back down into the hallway, and the men would be lined up, ready to go. Maybe a hood over their head, ear defenders so they couldn't hear, maybe some goggles if they weren't wearing a hood, blacked out, and their hands tied together with a cable tie, you know, the plastic cable ties. And then we were gone. Out we would go through the hole in the wall or the hole where the front door used to be, bundle these people onto a helicopter or a jeep, along with all their possessions, back to our base. We would leave that family without any males and without any of their valuable possessions. Those men would then be taken back to our base, where we would stand them against a wall and hand them over to the next team. We'd then go off and get some breakfast. That was our part. That was our role done. These men would then be interrogated further, maybe for a couple of hours, and their intelligence value would be assessed. Is this person really an insurgent, or is he just some sort of like minor player, or is he just a civilian? And then depending on what that intelligence value was rated as, they would be sent to another prison. If they were lucky, they might get sent to somewhere like Abu Ghraib, one of the big prisons, full of people. If they were unlucky, they would get sent to one of the black sites, one of the prisons, secret prisons, where torture wasn't just, you know, sort of a random thing. It was part of the process. One of the prisons that British forces used in Iraq, at Baghdad International Airport, we held people in dog kennels in the sun, out in the sun, and then dragged them off into shipping containers to torture. There were British RAF, not soldiers, airmen, who were tasked with guarding this prison camp. There were British officers who went into those torture interrogations and fed questions in and took information out. That was the process that we were running in Iraq. One where everyone could just say I was doing my job. No one got to see what was going on. I never went to one of these secret prisons. I never physically saw someone being tortured. The MI6 guy never saw us raiding that person's house. And this is what we were doing. We got sent on a job outside of Fallujah one night. I think we were in helicopters that night, and we got into someone's house, and I could hear the radio communications going on. I think I was in one of the helicopters just circling that night. And our guys had got in there and interrogated a young man with his young family, and it turned out that he had said to them that he had had enough of the war, he wasn't an insurgent, he'd actually got this farm off his uncle because he wanted to get out of Fallujah and keep his family safe. And I think our guys probably interrogated him for maybe 20 minutes. All his paperwork added up, all the stories added up. And our commander on the ground that night said, "We're not going to take you in." Got on the radio, told our commanders, "We're not bringing this person in. The soldier will obey orders without question." When we got back to the base, our commander, who was a major, so not someone insignificant, was taken to have a chat with the next person up and told in no uncertain terms, if we tell you to bring someone in, you bring them in. The next night, another unit was sent in to get that same person. Most of the times we went into someone's house, we were given a name and a photo. It was very rare that we actually found that person. It was very rare that we found the person we were looking for. We'd go into someone's house, they wouldn't be there, and we did one of two things. We would take all males of military age from that house, no matter if we wanted them or not. Just by being in that location, they were guilty, into the system. The other option, after doing that, was that if it ain't this house, it must be next door. We must have got this slightly out wrong. I was on jobs personally where we went through 3 houses in a row in one night. A mate of mine did 7 houses in a row, looking for these terrorists. All of these males, all of the males that we found in those buildings would end up in the prison system. I reckon about 1 in 20 jobs I did in Iraq, we actually found someone we were looking for. All the rest of it was just people who got caught up in it. And I've read reports since from guys who were interrogating people inside of these secret prisons, and they reckon that only 5% of the people we picked up were actually insurgents. When you're taking people in night after night, who are not the people you're looking for, it starts to have an effect. When you're trashing all these people's homes and you start to think, even from a military point of view, aren't we just making things worse? If these people didn't hate us before, they're going to hate us now, surely. This went on and on. Lots of things happened in Iraq. I haven't got time to go through all the detail of it. But almost everything that was happening was telling me that this is wrong. Something had switched inside me, and I was no longer willing to take a part in this. I remember one night, coming back from some operation, I'd been put into an American tank unit for the night to sort of direct them to, they were in an overwatch over us. And as we're going back, I'm in the back of this Bradley, I think, can't remember what tank it was. I could hear this noise. And I can hear them laughing. I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, we're knocking the lamppost down." I said, "What are you doing that for?" He goes, "Because we can." And compared to all the other stuff I saw in Iraq, it was quite minor, but it kind of summed things up. It was like, we can do what we want, when we want. There are no rules. And who cares what the people think about us? I started, I suppose you could say, to become quite a bad soldier. I wasn't interested, whereas before I wanted to be the first person through the door, I wanted to put the explosives on the door. I was quite happy to be in a helicopter doing Overwatch. Didn't want anything to do with this. Was quite happy to be out of the way. Didn't want to get my hands dirty. After I'd been there for, I don't know, 3 months, the CO came out to see us, sat us in a room like this. We were getting orders for a mission, some big mission. It was always, every time we were briefed, it was like, we're about to catch Zarqawi, who was the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq at the time, First couple of times you hear that, you think, wow, we're going to go and get him. And then after about 10 times, you think, really? And the first thing that was of significance was a joint operation, British and American. We were given our rules of engagement. And those rules of engagement were the same that I had obeyed since I was a young soldier in Northern Ireland. You will only use lethal force if lethal force is about to be used against you. And that means that someone has to be aiming a rifle at you or firing at you. Someone could be holding a rifle down by their side, and that is not reason enough to shoot them, not reason enough to use lethal force. And then he went on to explain the American rules of engagement, which were, you may use lethal force if you are in fear of your life. And that is something quite different. Because no matter what the jobs you're on, and the fact that you never actually meet any armed resistance, because if you smash your way into someone's house at 1 o'clock in the morning with explosives, believe it or not, no one is up for a fight. Every time you go through that door, there's an element of fear. Of course there is. You don't know what's the other side of that door. And if your rules of engagement say that you can open fire if you're scared, that kind of explains why on those joint operations, every night when we came back in, we hadn't shot anyone, and our sister unit had maybe shot 2 or 3 people. And once in a while you'd think, well, okay, you know, they obviously came up against some pretty hardcore insurgents who were ready and waiting. But when it happens 3, 4, 5, 6 times, you start to question that, whether that's true or not. But the CO went on to say something even more significant, I think. He said that this was the first war he was involved in that we weren't going to win. Quite interesting to hear from a CO. And then he went on to say that he was worried that we were becoming the secret police of Baghdad. And for me, those words were like a hammer blow. I'd already felt this, seen it, but to hear it spoken by someone of such high standing was like a hammer blow. Thinking, you know, back to when I was a kid, Britain's a good country. Britain goes to war for the right reasons. We're the good guys. We defeat the bad guys. They torture. They kill indiscriminately. They massacre, carry out genocides, and we're the people who stop that. And I looked around the building that we was living in, and it was a villa on the banks of the river Tigris, where one of Saddam's henchmen used to live. And I looked at the guy who was working for us, carrying out sort of interpretation and brutalising people in Iraqi. I started to think, well, maybe he was working for Saddam. And then you look at the prisons we were using, Saddam's prisons. You start to think, who are these people we're going after? Maybe they're the same people that Saddam used to go after. And it became apparent to me that we had replaced one evil dictatorship with another, us. And it became unbearable. It wasn't just me, there were other people who felt the same. I remember going into a slum one night, huge amount of explosives put on the door, we're all stacked up, ready to go in, and the roof almost came off. When we went inside the building, it's full of kids on the mattresses. They were all walking around sort of like dumbfounded, couldn't hear, you know, like deafened by what we'd done. No one was killed that night, I don't know how. And a huge row erupted when we got back to the base about the use of explosives in civilian areas. We were always operating in civilian areas. Some people were saying, we should keep this to the minimum. We don't want to hurt anyone. You know, this would be counterproductive. And other people were saying, fuck them, as long as we're not hurt. So there was a real divide. One night we got sent out into a village and captured so many people, bearing in mind that we were supposed to be after specific people. We were this surgical tool that was being used. We captured so many people that it took hours for us to ferry them back to the base in the helicopters. We got back to the base, lined them all up, old and young. I think one of the guys was even disabled. And an American intelligence officer went along, him, right, take the rest back. It was almost farcical. But it wasn't farcical for those people that we'd captured. Imagine that. The people who were held ended up in a secret prison system and were tortured. The people who were sent back, what was their life back? What was their life like when they got sent back? Imagine the questions. Why are you back? What's happened to my husband? Have you cut a deal with him? I got sent home on leave, and every day I go through the same thought process. I knew that what we were doing in Iraq was wrong. Not just militarily wrong, because it was creating more enemies than we were eliminating, but also morally wrong. smashing our way into people's homes, terrorising families, taking people away to be tortured. And I knew that I couldn't do it any longer.